What's going on, guys? So we're going to go over some historical Savate stuff. So one of the things you might not know, while we do teach Wing Chun here like 75% of the time, we also teach kickboxing and wrestling classes. And the 2 nights a week we do kickboxing, we are kind of hybridizing our Wing Chun, my old Kempo experience, my Savate experience, and more recently, historical Savate. So one thing you might not know about me is that from 2000 to 2003, the Kempo school that I trained at was kind of a mixed or multi-style school, and the kickboxing that we did was Savate based because my teacher was a Dan and Santo student, and he came up under Professor Salem in Savate, so we have this kind of modern Savate background, but 3 years of Savate is really not enough, and it was all relatively informal training, meaning that I don't have any kind of rank in an organization, and I never competed in Savate. I only competed in MMA. And a few years back when I joined the HEMA club here, the people we so graciously room with, I started finding out that there were some historical Savate manuals, and I started kind of bringing the Savate back into focus, looking at the history. And what's really cool about Savate is if you go back before the early 1900s, Savate still had some stand-up grappling in it, specifically throws, and there were even street fighting tactics in there, headbutts and whatnot. And some people claim that there were elbows and knees, though I haven't seen a lot of evidence of that. So Savate is a much more robust system than you might realize if you've only seen the modern sport, which is really cool. And my functional trained experience was in the modern sport, and now looking at the historical stuff is kind of revitalizing my understanding of the art and where it came from and kind of what it does and what its purpose is. And it's a really cool thing to kind of add in and really extend that range from the Wing Chun and even the Kempo, which is kind of a middle range. It's street fighting karate. So, it really extends the range out to the furthest reach that a human can have. It's like French long fist kung fu, which is kind of cool, I think. Charles has been with me for a while, and one of the things that he mentioned when we started doing the kickboxing classes, he always wanted to learn how to use his reach. You can see Charles and I are pretty close in size. We have very similar reach, and he always felt like he was kind of missing out on that, and the Savate has given him that, and he's doing quite well with it. So I brought him in today to help us film some of the stuff. We're just going to go kind of into some of the basics that Charlemagne put into his 1899 Savate manual. So the book, and I'll put a link below. It's not translated. You might be able to find an English translation online. The translations out there available are not very good, but we do the best we can, and you can supplement with some online translators. Don't use Google Translate. Reverso and Collins do a better job, things like that. But Charlemagne's book is kind of broken into 7 sections for the boxing. And remember, Savate, what we call Savate, right, it means old shoe. That's kind of it's a really old term. And down in Marseille, where we got all the high kicks from, they call that chausson, which means slipper. And by the 1800s, when Charlemagne was training and writing his books, they were just calling it Boxe Française, which is just French boxing. And the book is broken up into 7 parts, and the first part is kind of an introduction. Of course, there's a preface and history and all that, but you have kind of an introduction to your basics. And he kind of lists some things, and he keeps it very simple. He mentions that the drills in the book are exaggerated on purpose because over time you're going to make the movements smaller and more contained anyway. Part 2 is kind of solo exercises. It's not really forms, but just drills you can do on your own. Part 3 is kind of your simple partner drills. Part 4 goes deeper into that, and Part 4 starts including in some of the grappling, specifically kick catches and things like that. Part 5 is additional defensive techniques. Part 6 is actually English boxing, because keep in mind, at Savate's beginning, they didn't really punch. Now there's stories that perhaps punching was considered assault with a deadly weapon. It wasn't legal in France. I don't know whether that's true. It's just one of those hearsay things, but so that's why they apparently developed a system of kicking and a lot of open hand work. There's a somewhat significant presence of a punch called the swing punch in modern Savate, and that seems to go back to slapping. The word they use in French, baf, it literally just means to swing. And that may, in fact, be open hand cuffing of people, and it wasn't until, at least social convention about punching and whatnot relaxed that they started bringing in closed fist striking. We don't know, or at least I haven't found the evidence of it, but that's the stories that I've come across. And then part 7 of the book goes into sparring conventions, and he does make provision for takedowns during sparring. Keep in mind, even though in England they had already gone to Queensberry rules, the previous 100 and something years of boxing was not just punching, it was fist fighting in general. They just didn't want you to fight on the ground. If the man was down, you didn't beat him on the ground because that's, not manly, whatever, right? We know the French didn't particularly like the English didn't like kicking, so maybe the English didn't like kicking because it was a French thing. I don't know, but either way, they seem to agree on the idea if a man is down, you don't beat on him. That may not hold true in a street fight, but in any kind of dueling type environment, that was the convention. And so anyway, we do see a lot of throws, we do see some headbutts, and it's so much more than just shoe and glove like we see in the modern sport. So with that being said, let's go over the basic guards and the basic punches that are classic and true to Savate and during this time period. All right, so the first thing that we need to cover is the guards. So your guards are basically your standard bare knuckle boxing guards. And keep in mind this stuff, and Charlemagne does have kind of a method in this, and I'm not going to go deep into that. But keep in mind these guards are basically based on fencing guards. Most boxers were fencers first. Small sword was huge. You're coming out of the Napoleonic era, so you have a ton of saber fighters. That's just how these guys fought if they weren't wrestling. So when you look at a guard, let's go left foot forward. What he called, basically he says there's 4 ways to guard: left and right, and true guard and false guard. And that's it. So if Charles and I are both in our left guard, and we're both here, right? My lead hand is extended, my rear hand is closer to my solar plexus. I have a little bit more weight on my back leg than my front leg. He doesn't list out any kind of percentages, but best I can tell and what makes sense for our movement and everything is about a 60-40 distribution, right? And he does mention lean back a little bit, very, very common in the old bare knuckle boxing systems. From a modern athletics standpoint, that overweights you towards the rear, but let's just be honest to the source material for the moment, right? So here we'll be in true guard, right, because we're matched. Both of us have our left leg forward, both of us are in measure, and we're in our position here. Now if Charles stays put and I move, where I'm in my right guard, now we're in false guard. What some of you might call mirrored, or a kind of open stance, whatever. There's a lot of different terms for it. I prefer the term mirrored, but you're talking about being in false guard here. There's different capabilities, and we do change guards quite frequently. In fact, that's the next thing he talks about. You can relax. The next thing that he talks about is how you walk and change your guard. So unlike what we're used to in modern boxing, right, so Charles, if you just take a more natural fighting stance, just whatever your natural fighting stance is, right? Charles likes it right loop, so I'll just match with him, right? So if we're moving, right, normally we move the front leg first, right? So if I go forward and he goes back to maintain measure, right? We move just in this normal kind of split stance way. The way that Charlemagne describes the walking in this, because this is primarily a kicking art and you're doing a lot of stuff with your back leg planted and your lead leg moving and you're shifting your weight and all that, he has a lot more emphasis on bringing the back leg to the front leg. And what a lot of this allows, right, is a strong lunge. It's very fencing oriented, right? It allows me to bring in kicks, right? There's a lot of really cool things that you can do in other HEMA styles, in other HEMA systems. We might refer to these as gathering steps because you're gathering your feet together and then splitting. In Wing Chun, we call them replacing steps because you're bringing your feet together, you're kind of replacing your point of balance. So without changing your guard, this is kind of your method of walking, whether you're matched, mirrored, true guard, false guard, left, right, doesn't matter. What you're looking at is a basic method of kind of getting in there, these quick little, they're really just fencing moves. This is pure fencing. As far as changing the guard is a full passing step. And again, this is a big deal in fencing. When you do a passing step, you're walking all the way past, except here, we pivot and we change our guard, right? And same thing if I pass backwards, it's just forward and back, which is, it's just a full walking step. They're maintaining their stance. They like to use this T stance kind of thing, which is very, very fencing oriented. I'm not particularly comfortable with that in the modern setting. I don't propose that. I think that leads to people being super duck-footed and whatnot, and that's not particularly where I want my students to go with it, but you should at least understand where this stuff comes from and why they did certain things. So from there, he gets into the direct punching. Now keep in mind at this point, boxing was comprised mainly of straight punches for the educated puncher. Round punches were seen as lower class and easier to defend against. So the majority of your punches are straight punches, so he gives a little extra special attention to this, and he talks about 4 methods to straight punch. And this is kind of actually a cool way to look at it. And again, hang out with the HEMA guys for so long, doing rapier and saber and those kind of things, we see these moves exact, the difference being whether you have a sword in your hand or you're punching with your fist. So again, if we're on guard here, let's just say for the moment, we're matched, we're both in a right lead, right? Charles can take whatever guard he wants. I'm not worried about him taking a formal, traditional, old school guard. My first punch here, and this is funny, he doesn't show the direct punch with any kind of jab. He doesn't really show jabs here, although there are occasions where you will punch off of the lead leg. What he actually shows is in this position is you're actually loading back in a chamber. Hey, this is a lot like what we do in Wing Chun. You're loading this back as you're extending this foot or this hand forward, and you're actually loading everything back here. Because you're gonna, basically like a standing lunge, you're going to run everything through onto the front leg as you whip this arm back and drag your shoulders forward and strike. This is a super long range strike for what it's worth. Now, when we do this, we'll also notice that he maintains that vertical fist. Very, very old school boxing. Very, very cool bare knuckle boxing style. And again, this makes it great crossover with Wing Chun. So when we're standing in our stance here, and I'm in my position here, all I'm going to do is kind of load back, stick my hand in his face, and drive in. Now, as far as his blocking patterns go, I wasn't going to get into the blocking, but I should mention this. He mentions multiple times, you hit vigorously with the fist. Your block is a strike. You're literally hammer fisting the strike out of the air. I'm going to ask Charles not to break my arm, but he's going to block my strike the way they would. Now, it's not just a hammer fist. He's actually going to sit back on his leg and throw that hammer fist out. So if I'm here, he's here, as I extend and I load, he should already be prepped for what I'm doing, right? And I come in, and he just basically moves and strikes. And he's being super nice with me. This would be smashing through my arm. He's being super nice. And of course, from that position, hey, doesn't that look like the load we just did for the punch? He could return the punch. So again, what we're seeing is this parry and riposte kind of fencing idea in the historical Savate. Historical Savate is hand and foot fencing, 100% hand and foot fencing. And pretty much all of your parries, hammer fist, hammer fist, hammer fist. It's pretty much it. Now, he does make mention in the book again that for the sake of training, you can do this with open hands, but you should understand that you are meaning to strike the strike. Important distinction to make. Okay, so that's standing still, right? The second method is by splitting. He calls it by splitting. This is what we might consider a lunge in fencing. And it's the same thing, just the difference is from my position here, as I do this, I'm running everything forward and getting more extension out of it. Huge, huge deal. Lunging is a really, really important skill to have. And again, even in fencing, we don't do these massive lunges like this all of the time. You can't do that. You train in exaggeration to train the muscles, to train the harder things. But when it comes to sparring, it ends up just looking like a step. All right, the next variation that we're going to be looking at is with walking, which is literally just to say, in our stance here, all I'm going to do is bring everything forward and drive in, which again makes plenty of sense, right? And Charles did exactly what he was supposed to do. He kept his hands up to the block, and he moved in kind. Again, keeping to this historical pattern, we wouldn't just move in a line like this. You'd be moving around in circles and whatnot. And yes, there is head movement. Head movement is covered in part 6 in the boxing section. In fact, I think one of Charles's first lessons in Savate was just head movement. We pretty much spent the entire first class with him just dodging my punches. Yeah. So, and now he's actually pretty good at it, so that's good. All right, and the last method of the direct punch is with changing the guard. And when you change the guard, this is where it's going to come out on the lead hand. So if I'm here in my right side guard and we're matched, I'm literally going to be walking forward so that we might end up in false guard, or at least that's going to be my aim. And of course, he's going to respond how he needs to respond. All right, and I come through and I drive. And again, I should be, for the stylistic sake, driving everything back, getting that full turn of the body. That chambering motion there is, Colonel Monastery talks about in his book too. It was like they just didn't go far enough with the idea of, hey, don't drop your hands to swing over, don't cock back. They just said, well, instead of doing this, do this, because at least your arms are contained. Right? Not a bad idea, maybe not far enough. We certainly don't do that anymore in the modern sport or anything, because keeping your guard up is more important. But again, you should know where this stuff comes from. And again, in fencing, you keep that other hand back, because you don't want it to get cut. You're not going to block a sword with your hand. Not well, at least. All right, so I do believe that is it for the punching video. Oh, no, it's not. All right, good. Go do the sensor. Okay. All right, so the last piece, and this is kind of their version of the swing punch. At this point in time, all the words were in French are just like long descriptions of the movement that you're doing, so they didn't use the term baff for this, though it is clearly the modern swing punch. They just called it the demi-circulaire. Sorry, my French is terrible. Punch. Basically, semicircular punch. And this one is a little bit exaggerated, and this one, he makes special mention of that you need to hit the arm when you parry, because there's so much force in the punch. So that being the case, again, if we're in our leads here, now this one, I don't load up on my back leg when I extend. I'm actually going to be going forward and extending almost like I'm punching him. And as I do that, this one drops down. And then I roll, and I roll my hand over so that my knuckles are going to be hitting. Now this can, go on many, many targets, right? So as I do this, and I distract with one, drop, and swing the other one, and bring it around. As I'm doing that, he needs to be blocking and hammer fisting the crap out of my arm here to stop that punch, and then he would probably want to come in with a direct punch after that to strike me. And what we're basically seeing here is that you have this quintessential French swing punch, and you have the classic bare knuckle boxing straight punch. That is where Savate kind of started picking up the boxing, and it grew over time, and now they have your standard boxing punches, hooks and uppercuts and shovel hooks and those kind of things, even overhead punches, which are really, really cool when you can knock somebody's leg out from under them and punch them on the way down. That's fun. So what we're looking at there then is kind of the place where Savate kind of started becoming the modern sport, but was still embedded in the old Parisian street fighting and the old Marseille sailors game, which was apparently just bored sailors kicking each other in the face. So keep that in mind, right? Savate was essentially a street fighting system based on, there was a massive population boom and people were fighting and they needed to figure out how to fight, and you had soldiers coming home from war with nowhere to go, and well, that's where, supposedly that's where the term old shoe or Savate came from, is these guys came home with well-worn boots and started kicking people in the face with them. So, there you go. So anyway, I love Savate. I think Savate is really cool. You'll notice that we're wearing bare feet in here. A lot of it is, this mat is very not forgiving for wrestling shoes, and it is very, very difficult in the United States to find Savate shoes, and you were gonna pay a pretty penny to import some good like Reebok or Metal Box Savate shoes from overseas. Wrestling shoes are great for wrestling on this mat because you need that grip. But when you need to start pivoting and being light on your feet, they just stick to the floor hard here, and you're going to blow out a knee. So we tend to do this barefoot, but that's fine. Right? I'm not going to be putting you guys into a Savate ring just like my teacher didn't anticipate us going into Savate tournaments. I'm not planning on putting my guys in Savate tournaments. What we're doing is we're taking my old training and these historical concepts and applying them to the overall, for lack of a better term, mixed martial arts and street fighting perceptions of violence. How to use these in a fist fight, not in a particular competitive setting. So with that, that's kind of your first little bit on historical Savate, and we'll talk to you next time. Good journey. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. In the links down below, you can find our social media, and I encourage you to follow us there. Take a look at our blog, where we have articles that go into depth that we just can't do in our video productions. And on top of that, go to our Amazon store, pick out a shirt that you like, and every little bit helps. If you're ever in the Phoenix area, look us up. Come in for a class, come in for open mat, whatever. Love to see you down here. You can find all our contact info on the website. Talk to you guys in the next one. Good journey.